Cool. We're live. Okay. Anyone that shows up, we're going to be discussing Elric Volume 1 Bind Up, Books 2 through 4, because life happened, and then holidays, and then more life happened. So, whoopsie daisy on doing those live streams for discussions for each book. Oops. But we all finished the rest of the bind up, so that's exciting. Yay. Finally. So we'll. What now?
I said that's the important thing. We all actually got to read it.
It's true. Hello, cool gamer. Yeah. So I feel like we don't need to even do a non-spoiler section because we already talked about Elric in the last discussion, so we can just like kind of go all the way in. But before we do that, I'll let everybody introduce themselves again, direction-wise. So, same folks from last time joining. Andrew will be joining hopefully shortly when he gets back. But
yeah, well, my name is Joanna from the channel Joanna, and I mostly focus on fantasy on my channel. I do read other genres now and then, but yeah, I'm excited to be here to discuss the rest of the Elric Saga Volume 1.
Hey, I guess I'll go next. I'm Liam. My channel is Liam's Lyceum. I also like fantasy and science fiction. I read whatever I want, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. I like Elric, so here I am.
And you have the old covers, don't you, Liam?
Yeah, I do.
And you also read like a lot of like old, like
nice,
classic, like Middle English stuff, right?
Yeah. I like anything. Basically, that's the way I guess I like to put it. So, Old English, Middle English, Modern English, 20th century, 19th century, this century, doesn't really matter. So,
where is that
translated, Liam, or do you read Old English?
I'm working on my Old English still. So, generally, it's both. Just like side by side is what I prefer at this point. So,
right. So you can read it and then make sure that it's, you know what it says.
Yeah.
Cool. Did not know that. That is really cool. I'm Sarah from the channel Sarah Reads. I do not have the really cool old covers like Liam, but I do have this awesome bind up here, which is great. And I'm excited to discuss.
Yeah. Awesome. Like I said before, we're discussing books 2 through 3. 2 through 3. Oh my god, 2 through 4. So I don't know. I guess because as I'm prone to do, I don't prep anything. So I guess you guys want to start with just discussing Fortress of the Pearl as the second book in the bind up, which is the later published of the 4 in this section, which I realized after the fact.
How does everybody like that? Like, we've read 4 of them now, and I feel like that's enough to see the difference between old writing, like his early writing and his later writing. Like, do you like reading it like this chronologically, or is it jarring to go back and be like, oh, clearly he was a younger writer when this story was done?
For me, I could definitely see the difference because of the 4 in here. Fortress of the Pearl was my favorite, and that was published, I think, 12 or 15 years after the first book was published. So it's like you can see the growth there, and it's also a lot less weird. So and I didn't really, spoiler alert, I didn't really jive with the last 2 stories because I'm just like, what the hell is going on? So
what is this?
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's a really good question. I think that if I had to choose a favorite, I think it would also be The Fortress of the Pearl. And I think that you could see, I don't know, I feel like the structure of the story, it seemed to me to have a better flow and arc to it than the other ones. But I still actually enjoyed all 4. And I think I'm the only one. That's the impression I've gotten anyway.
I mean, I liked the last 2, but I'm just like, I don't know what's going on, but I guess I'm just going.
What's happening? I'm along for the ride, but I don't know what's going on.
But you're right, Evie. I mean, he does go into the weird. And I think that goes along with the mythic feel again to this type of fantasy. And I guess is that pretty, Liam, would you say that that's pretty much the way Sword and Sorcery is? Or align Sword and Sorcery?
Yeah. That's I think some people would tell you it's essential, actually, to have weird elements, because I mean, Sword and Sorcery came out of the pulp era, and specifically the people who created it were friends with Lovecraft, right? And they were writing in the same places as Lovecraft, so they're taking that influence essentially. So
that makes sense, because there's some kind of Lovecraftian things that happen.
Yeah,
I see that too. Yeah,
especially I feel like in Sailor on the Seas of Fate, the first story that's like very cosmic, kind of odd, to say the least. So, but yeah, as far as like the difference in the styles, it's very noticeable, I think. When I read these actually a while ago, compared to y'all, at least. It was still relatively recent though, but when I first read through them, I liked Fortress of the Pearl the least. I reread it though, and I liked it way more actually the second time. I really liked it the second time actually, and I'm not quite sure why that is, to be honest. I don't know. It's really good, but yeah, the first time through, I was like, this is too long-winded for me. The characters are better in Fortress of the Pearl, in my opinion. The dialogue is better. Just the inner monologue as well is better. And it's just, the Dream Quest thing is definitely a later Moorcock creation, which is pretty important in this book. And you'll see it more, especially in the Dream Quest trilogy, since that's what that is all about. But yeah.
So when you read this the first time, Liam, did you do it in chronological order, or was Fortress of the Pearl a later book when you did your read through?
I read it in chronological order. I saw a lot of people, recommending it that way. Other people recommending that you should read it after you've read Stormbringer and then read The Revenge of the Rose as well. I was like, chronological is fine by me. I don't think you actually need to though. Like, I feel like you could throw the only ones I feel like that matter as far as chronology goes are like books 1, 4, 7, 8 maybe, and then the rest you can just kind of throw in wherever you want. The 7 mostly because it kind of leads up into 8, and then 8 is the end, 1 is the end, and 4 is kind of a sequel to 1, I think, as far as the story there. But then the rest are just like, just throw them wherever you want. And then because like Moorcock did a terrible job with his chronology anyways, like it's so confusing. I mean, even in the bindups, it's confusing because even that new book, it says it takes place between like the 2 volumes and it doesn't. So, I mean, which is confusing as heck. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, it wasn't in the original bind-up I read when I was a teen. I think the other 3 are, but the Fortress of the Pearl wasn't in it. But I did love that, the multiverse and the dream sequence. And I don't know, I just thought it was cool. It was interesting because it seemed kind of, in a way, nostalgic 80s whimsical to me too. And somebody brought up, especially with the end of that story, somebody commented on one of my videos and said that it reminded them of the Neverending Story. And I said, that must be why I loved it. Give me that kind of vibe. I could see that.
Yeah,
I could see that from book 2.
It feels much more narrower and focused in scope compared to, especially books 3 and 4 in the bind-up, where it's like, I feel like he's doing a lot of stuff and like more, what's that phrase? A mile across and an inch deep rather than an inch across a mile deep. So maybe that's why I like it, but the writing is consistently wonderful throughout all of the stories. Like, I really, really like his writing.
Mm-hmm. It fits well for the kind of story that it is. Like it feels a bit archaic, but it's still accessible. It's not super dense, but like clearly he cared about crafting his sentences.
Yeah.
But in general, how did you like Fortress of Pearl, Sarah?
I liked it. I think it's probably my favorite out of all of them. And for the same reasons, hey, Andrew, same reasons that you said. Like, I just think that the characters were a little better. The dialogue was a little better. Or Liam said, like, those things were all just a little bit better. I did like the weirdness of the other two. I had some qualms with book 4, which I think line up with some of the things that Andrew didn't like about the 4th one. But I did like the weirdness of it. So I appreciated that it was kind of wonky.
So Andrew,
Hi.
How's your back?
I'm still in a lot of pain.
Oh no.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Do you like break your back again and put it back together?
No, that's not how chiropractors work. Otherwise,
I don't know. But anyways, in general, how did you like the rest of the books?
So are we here talking about 2, 3, and 4?
Yes.
Okay, I couldn't remember where we left off.
Look at the title, Andrew.
Yeah, no, I'm not here to do that.
No reading.
2 I really enjoyed. I really liked Fortress of the Pearl. I liked how kind of psychedelic it kind of was. And it really, like, I felt like Moorcock was like flexing his multiverse muscles in that one. Like it was really interesting. The one with the different timelines was interesting. I enjoyed it. But overall it wasn't my favorite. And then we all know how I feel about the 4th book. I gave that one. I think that was my only 1-star review of 2022.
Look at Liam. It's like a shock. You just take a moment to compose yourself.
I was angry. I was angry from the moment it started.
That sounds like a you problem, Andrew.
Yeah, probably.
This is my favorite thing about you, Evie, is when you agree, like when someone dislikes a book and you agree with them, you're like, absolutely, this is terrible. If someone dislikes a book and you disagree, you're like, this sounds like a you problem, not a book problem.
We're full spoiler discussion, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So my problem with The Weird and the White Wolf is like we have Elric. We have the first book, and it's very well fleshed out. It's got this whole story flow. We get back in Weird and the White Wolf. We're finally back. It wraps up in like 10 pages. And then like to the point where he is literally his cousin is dealing with a demon, and instead of stabbing him in the face or doing anything, he runs by him, which then allows him to come back later so he can kill his lady love for no particular reason. But after being cut in half. Doesn't make any sense. And then we deal with the rest of the book while he's moping. Every section of the book has a new woman throwing herself at him.
Well, I feel like that's par for the course.
I've
accepted that as a character quality.
It felt, in that amount of page count, it just felt rushed. It felt cringy. It felt misogynistic. It didn't flow well. And I think that comes from, of course, Moorcock stitching together these short stories. To make this book, but I don't think it works well because within each self-contained short story, yeah, you can have a love interest. If you're going to turn it into a book, maybe not.
So I think that's also part of the maybe like the disconnect is like the last story isn't a story on its own. It's 3 separate stories that are tangentially connected to one another. Mm-hmm. So like I read them individually, like as individual stories, not as the Weird and the White Wolf story.
I read it as The Weird and the White Wolf.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But that's my rant. How did you guys like it?
I liked it. I liked everything. I liked all of them, actually. I think that, I mean, yeah, it's interesting because with The Weird and the White Wolf, I don't know. I don't never have a problem with the trope of somebody struggling after loss. So I guess for me, I thought that was understandable. And I don't know, I kind of like the journey between him and that, I cannot remember his name, his sort of sidekick character that he accumulates along the way. It kind of, I think I was, yeah, it kind of reminded me, it gave me Geralt and Dandelion vibes from The Witcher. And even though the guy wasn't a musician, it was just still the short redheaded sidekick kind of thing, who's kind of more playful and lighthearted, whereas Elric is more like stoic. And I don't know, I liked that dynamic, and I liked the female character that they picked up along the way. I'm sorry, I'm so bad with character names in this because they were so short that I didn't really program them.
Anna, just I just remember that because I literally just opened up the page to look for Moonglum. So I think it was
Moonglum,
Yashana.
Moonglum, thank you. And then
Moonglum, yeah.
the female character, I thought it was interesting how she had this quest to regain her wings or heal her wings, something along those lines. And then when they got closer and closer to their destination, the more she tried to change Elric's mind. I don't know. I thought it was I didn't really analyze it deeply, but I thought, I don't know, it had some substance to it at the same time.
I just don't understand why she felt the need to try and seduce him. Like, why does every woman who meets Elric feels the need to try and jump in his bed?
Well, maybe he's sexy.
But he's supposed to be this sickly albino dude, but we're never shown him being sickly unless it's the beginning of a story and he's in a bad way. And then immediately 10 pages later, he's powered up and fine, and he's never taking potions mid-book. It's always just,
Andrew?
I'm so sickly and I'm so...
Andrew, don't judge a woman's attraction to who she's attracted with, okay? Some sickly men might be very attractive, okay?
That sounds like a you problem.
I'm sorry.
Andrew and I are just like, it's like siblings fighting all the time. It's like so combative, but all in good fun.
But I do think like it is that kind of like 80s or even earlier like that. It's very Conan the Barbarian, right? Like he is going to find a maiden and she is going to want to sleep with him. Like it's okay not to like that, but I think it's also okay to accept it as part of the genre. Like it's the same thing as like people get upset about Dresden sometimes, then other people can say, I accept these tropes as part of the noir genre at large.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it's good or bad. It just means that, you know, it's either to your taste or not. I also did not enjoy that part. Like, I don't tend to like that. I don't need everybody to want to sleep with Elric, and also like Silmaril was his like love of his life. And there's not a lot of time that passes by through this. And, you know, people process things in different ways, but it also is not my favorite. Like I'm sad and lonely, so I'm going to sleep with a bunch of people to try to feel less sad and lonely.
Yeah,
I turned human.
I did get a little angry. I noticed that I got a little bit angry when he was right away sleeping with another woman. But at the same time, part of me, this is such a bitter thought, I know, but part of me thought, well, that's kind of realistic.
True, yeah. And Elric is very like,
yeah.
Oh, so where'd you want to?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say he's very like fatalistic. So I'm sure to him, it's just like, well, she's gone. So I may as well self-destruct a little bit more. Like, I don't know that he even views it as any kind of like betrayal to her memory or anything like that. It's more like that part of me is gone. I don't have any feelings for anyone. So I'm just going to allow this to happen.
But he was cheating on her in book too.
And I know, but it wasn't a dream.
It was great love. Elric doesn't have one.
If you're dreaming and dreaming of somebody else, does that count as cheating? That's a question.
I would have been more okay with Weird and the White Wolf if there was only one love interest across all 3 sections or 4 sections. I don't remember how many sections there were. If Silmaril had died and there had been one woman that he kind of struggled with.
Okay, remind me the other one because I'm just remembering one. I'm remembering the girl with the wings.
There's Moonglum, and then there's another one.
No, Moonglum is his buddy.
Yes, it's male psychic.
One of them is the sorceress.
I think you're thinking of the woman he goes on the mission for. The Empress woman.
There's like 1 or 2.
Woman?
Yeah, one of them is like the lady in the tower, the lady in the castle.
That one.
Yeah, none of those bothered me. That's interesting because I guess I saw it as he was just trying to. This woman, I didn't really like her, honestly. I didn't like her, but at the same time, to me, it seemed like she was on a power kick, and it wasn't even so much that she was attracted to Elric. It was more she was attracted to feeling empowered through getting to be able to seduce men. So to me, I understood that. I didn't like it, but I understood it. And with the other woman, the way that I saw that, it did upset me a little. Both of them did upset me, given, like I said, that he was still mourning over Silmaril. But with the second woman, I don't. It was very okay. This is hard because in this type of genre, you're not getting a lot of time to develop character or to develop nuance, I think, with characterization. So but I still felt like I read into the page that when he was talking to this poor girl who was wanting to find this book, that he was seeing how broken she was. And it was like, oh, you're broken, and feeling a connection to her through her brokenness because he's broken. And so that was the point of connection. And maybe I could fix her. And by trying to fix her, I could fix myself. Because I know a lot of people who do that with relationships. They get attracted to the broken type.
And then he decides to bully her 50 pages later.
Bully her?
This is Elric we're talking about.
It is Elric.
Yeah, it's Elric. So I will say for myself, sorry, I just saw Parmita's comment. So for me, after Fortress of the Pearl, I took every single love interest as just like, oh, come on. So it rolled my eyes and then read on. So because I didn't see, for me, I didn't see any conflict with Elric after, or even before Cimmeril died. He's like, oh, I should be thinking of Cimmeril, and then immediately he'd be like, okay, like he was
But
very
like her death was dumb.
It's true, but I feel like everyone is just it's not even I don't know how to describe it. They're not caricatures, but they're not like, there's no agency to anyone, even Elric. Like he's just so, I feel like he's so, there's conflict, but he's also very passive. If that makes sense. Does that make sense?
He does have a
Yeah.
I think there is a passive quality there. I would agree with that.
Yeah, it's definitely all about the fate. Actually, I think he gets a little less passive in the second volume, at least at the end of that. But I mean, like,
This one.
yes, I felt like, though, for at least the Weird of the White Wolf, that, I mean, yeah, it really showcases the doomed hero, right? Because that's what he is. And if you've read The Broken Sword, which is a big inspiration for Elric, it's not surprising. Like, it's kind of the same story, actually, in some ways. But, I mean, with the death of Cimmeril, that's just like Elric going into his lack of control, right? Like, he can't control Stormbringer. Right, essentially, that's like
But
the
he never
important part of
needed
that.
to. He just needed to stab his cousin on the way out of the tower the first time.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that, I guess, but then at the same point, it's like, I mean, if you remember, we talked about in the first book that, like, the idea of Stormbringer is just like, oh, it's this cool sword, right? And then, like, it'll help him, you know. And he's just like, oh, I can control it essentially as well. You find out in Weird of the White Wolf he can't, like, and he can't, and that's why he's not sick either, is because the sword gives him souls, essentially, like it gives him life, other people's vitality, right? So he's not sick generally for most of the time after this one. So yeah, maybe that's sexy, I guess. He's also edgy. And if you look at the old Michael Whalen,
Are you telling me that
cover,
this
I
is
mean, like, you can
YA?
even see his nipple here. I mean, so I mean, like,
You can
just
see
see through his shirt. I mean, like, but
If I see
no,
areola, I'm out.
So yeah,
It's interesting because
anyway.
there's a quote by Moonglum, and I was trying to just find it as I was flicking through, but he says something like, Elric, I don't know if you're actually doomed or if it's just your own like bad attitude that makes you feel like you're doomed. And it's interesting to think of it like that. Like, how much of this is Elric's fate and how much is it him succumbing to what he feels his fate is and then allowing that to drag him along instead of fighting against it. And that comes up over and over in the stories. Like, even though they can be a bit surface level in some ways, Moorcock does do a lot more of that kind of exploration in like these last three, the subsequent three in this bind up. Like there's more questions about fate and what that means.
Yeah,
That's a good point. There was a quote somewhere, and I want to say it was in the last book as well, and I just saw it a second ago and now I can't find it, but there was something about the things will change. I even like drew a bracket around it because it was something about things changing when man learns to trust mankind, and how I felt like that circled back even to, oh, here it is. Maybe I hope I'm not being too out of context when I mention this here, but he says to Elric, who's somebody, Smjorgen, he talks about how Elric is loyal, that he feigns cynicism, that his sword betrayed him. And he says, the irony of it, man may trust man, Prince Elric, but perhaps we'll never have a truly sane world until men learn to trust mankind. That would mean death of magic, I think. I don't know why that really stuck with me. Man trusting mankind. Because I don't know, I think that plays into, that seems like the opposite of trying to assert your control over fate. Because fate would mean like I'm gonna have a lot of agency, I'm going to have a lot of power, but I'm not going to trust people either. I'm going to kill my cousin as soon as I get the chance. But I felt like there was also a reason why he let your coon live. And maybe there was something. And when I read that quote, I thought maybe that is sort of a looming in Elric's mind somewhere. This idea of trusting mankind. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it. I might be.
No, I think that's a good. Personally, I think that's like, I think two ideas that Moorcock plays with a lot actually in the Elric books is humanity, right? Because even if you go to like Sailor and the Seas of Fate, it's basically saying that Melnibonéans are not human, and he'll play more into that later. But also fate as well, right? And so like, and then the idea of like, what even is fate, right? Because we have like words like fatalistic, and people know what that means. You can define that, right? But maybe Moorcock is trying to, be like Plato, or and be like, what do we know what it is? You know what I mean? Can you define it up to a certain point, or does it become too abstract, right? And so I mean, like the word weird means fate, okay, but it also means history, at least in an Old English context, which is where the word is Old English, but and like weird sisters or whatever. But the word for historian in Old English is weirdritera, which just means weird writer. All right, and so it's just like, what is fate? Is it something you can control, or is it something you can't control, right? And so it's like, and what is humanity? Because like, is Elric human? Does he give up his humanity at some point? Does he try to, redeem it, like become human? I mean, are these humans better than the Melnibonéans in reality? Like just stuff like that, or like Moonglum is a good, foil, I would say, for Elric in a way. He's also based off Moorcock's friend, by the way, Barrington Bailey, if you ever read any of his stuff. And so I don't know. I think it's cool that Moorcock is exploring this stuff, especially since he wrote most of this when he was in his early 20s.
I think that's pretty cool too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I guess tangentially related. This is the way my brain works, though. Related to that, with this idea of fate, like Elric is kind of on this, or really everyone is on this balance between law and chaos of like one of the two things must win. And I think it was, I'm gonna butcher this name, Orunlu the Keeper. He was in like a stronghold or something like that. He says, he's talking about the book. He says, this disturbs me, but it appears there's another possibility which disturbs me even more. What is that? Elric said, it could create a tremendous impact on the multiverse. That complete entropy would result. My masters do not desire that, for it could mean the destruction of all matter in the end. And the portion that I specifically highlighted was, we exist only to fight, not to win, but to preserve the internal struggle. And I feel like Elric, like when I read that, I was like, oh, that's basically just Elric. Like he's like on a treadmill going nowhere, and he's just fighting against everything, while also still being passive. It makes sense in my brain. But
yeah, that does make sense. Mm-hmm. So. Do we lose Andrew?
We might have. He might be dealing with children or
wrath.
Yeah. But yeah, so I did. I know I highlighted this before, but I know you've read Fritz Leiber, right, Liam? So
yeah, I like Leiber more than Moorcock, but yeah. And it's okay, I forgive you, Paramita.
I see the influence of Paul Anderson's The Broken Sword in Elric. What books or authors did Moorcock's Elric?
R.A. Salvatore Dritz.
Yeah.
100%.
So, like, reading Elric, honestly, to me is like, and I feel like I've mentioned this before, it's just like watching an 80s fantasy movie like Dragon Slayer or Never Ending Story. Like, it's just so, like, dark and fantastical and just, yeah, I
liked it. I like that about it. You know what I would also say it influenced directly? Had to have influenced Malazan. I would say Animander Rake, even though Animander Rake is black. He also has this big gnarly sword, Dragnipur. And I can't help but wonder if Dragnipur was influenced by...
And he might have influenced Sephiroth as well from Final Fantasy.
Yeah. And Rake is definitely Elric. And I think Rake is also a mix of Drow, though, because the Tistandi are definitely Drow, in my opinion. But
But they are kind of emo, the Tistandi, so...
I will say that based on what the premise that I've read of the Drowned Kingdom, and Andrew, you can either confirm or deny my assumptions here. The main character in the Drowned Kingdom feels like he could be very much an Elric character.
No, I don't think so.
Really?
No. I'm a few months removed, but I never once have been reminded of Elric while reading that book.
Okay, because again, based on the premise that I read of it, he's like this very nihilistic, doomed, almost anti-hero, and he's part of a people that is perfect. And I took that as an equivalent of the Melnibones. And
well, I mean, there is that theme. That theme is there, but whether that can be attributed straight to Elric or not.
No, I know, but there was just a reminiscence.
It does have that in, like, the Atlantean society was a perfect elevated society.
Yeah.
So it's kind of which one influenced which. Like, did Atlantean society influence Melnibone, or did Melnibone influence the modern myth? You gotta play fast and loose with those concepts.
Yeah.
But something else I really loved, specifically about, I think you could find elements of this and actually some more than one story in this bind-up, but specifically in the Fortress of the Pearl, I really love how there were certain realms associated with dreaming and longing and sort of universal emotions, and emotions that would be portrayed in fantasy as being very personal. And you see how some of them are personal to Elric, like how his relationship with his father played out, or, you know, his feelings towards Cimmeral or whatever. But I feel like in that realm, it was almost like highlighting the fact that these type of emotions or experiences are universal. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really cool, the way that was portrayed in the dream world.
Although I will add, to kind of go back to Andrew's point about the love interests in the dream world, the love interest is able to conceive a child in the real world with Elric.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I forgot about that.
I know.
I was wondering about that, because I was like, I was forgiving of them making love in the dream, because I thought, well, they are in the dream world. You know, maybe that can't be helped. But then when they come out of that, it just brought up more questions about that, I think.
Yeah, and they did say, it says in the story that he's not going to ever know that he's a father, but that doesn't mean that the character won't come back, maybe.
Yeah, Una is important for the Dream Quest trilogy.
Yeah, I loved her character. I thought of all the female characters in the book, that was my favorite female character.
Yeah. Out of you've got Cimmeral and then her. Those were my two favorite.
Yeah.
Of the female foils. Is that the word I'm looking for? Representation? I don't know.
Characters. There you go.
Characters. There we go. Yeah, my two favorite female characters.
But in response to Paramita's comment there about Moorcock being labeled anti-Tolkien, I think that Liam addressed that pretty well in his video about Epic Pooh, right? That he wasn't necessarily anti-Tolkien, right? Let you answer that.
I wouldn't say is. I mean, he's got a bone to pick with Tolkien, but I think it's partially because Tolkien is big, and Moorcock feels like the little guy, and he's always punching up. If you read his earlier essay of Aspects of Fantasy, which was like 14 or so years before he wrote Epic Pooh, he's like trying really hard to be nice to Tolkien, but then inadvertently just insults Tolkien. And so, I mean, it's kind of funny actually. Yeah, Moorcock is, in a way though, he's also, yeah, he responds to Tolkien in a way, which we talked about though, kind of in Elric Saga. So yeah, in a way, he is kind of, he's trying to separate himself, but I don't know, Moorcock's just a funny guy. So
I wonder if maybe what it is that he saw a certain response to Tolkien and he appreciated Tolkien, but then I think I feel like the way I'm relating that is sometimes you see the fandom respond a certain way in fantasy, and then it becomes almost like a hard rule. Like fantasy has to have a hard magic system because Brandon Sanderson was so awesome. And then there's an author who wants to respond to that. Like, well, maybe that worked for that, but there has to be room for other things and other directions and other explorations.
Yeah.
My response to that comment, and hear me out, because this is one of those things where it's like I probably shouldn't open my mouth. I'm just gonna, hear me out. So I do think Moorcock puts his big ideas first. I think that is very evident in Elric, where the idea comes before the writing. Especially, and again, I'm gonna harp on Weird and the White Wolf. Specifically paired with the first entry in the bind-up. Even though Weird and the White Wolf was written first, he didn't carry over the rules that he established in Weird and the White Wolf to Elric, and instead he wanted to do an idea exploration, and so he's going to do it whether or not continuity makes sense or not. Specifically, the whole scene in the first part of Weird and the White Wolf, he stabs Irkun with Stormbringer, and he just resists it because. And then while being stabbed and half chopped in twain, he can just reach over, grab, and then throw her onto the tip of Stormbringer as well. Because of fate. And so I think he wants to explore the idea before he does his writing. Because from a writing standpoint, that's kind of, we're on shaky ground. I'll be nice and say that's shaky ground for writing, but from an idea standpoint, it does let you explore some great ideas. That's the nicest way I can put that.
You're reaching.
So I mean, you could be right, but also like I don't, this probably sounds bad, I don't read Elric for any like profound like revelations about
Neither do I. That's why I got
society
mad.
or myself. So I just read them as like episodic like adventure stories, like Sword and Sorcery. Like I literally took them for what they were on the page, and if there's inconsistencies and he's retconning himself, cool, he's gonna retcon himself. So
yeah, but it feels like he's getting a pass, honestly. Like if we were talking about anybody else, we'd rip them to shreds for it.
I mean, yeah, that's fair, but at the same time, he wasn't writing a book series.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it is a book series now, but that's just by modern trends where no one reads magazines anymore. I mean, heck, no one reads books this small. So, I mean,
I do. They're called novellas.
Well, this is actually a novel, technically. So, I mean, right, Brandon Sanderson's novellas are novels. But they're just not, the normal-sized ones. And so, knowing that it's a fix-up, which you don't get like almost ever these days, I give him a pass. I mean, in some ways, it is a little tedious. I will admit. I mean, and it gets even more tedious in the Dream Quest trilogy. So I mean, like, hopefully you like that. But it's just because he's thinking about things, and so he does retcon. I mean, like, the Revenge of the Rose has a huge retcon. It basically retcons the whole last story on the Sailors of Seas of Fate, basically. So it's just like, and I still really enjoy the Sailors and Seas of Fate, and I like the Revenge of the Rose as well. To me, it's like, yeah, it'd be nice if he had more consistency. I will admit, you know what I mean, because like Conan is still consistent, you know, and Fafhrd and the Grey Mouse are still consistent, but at the same time, I don't care that much. So.
I know that he has a spin-off series related to, oh god, what's the character's name? I think it was from Sailors on the Seas of Fate. Starts with a C. I wonder have you read any of those, Liam? Corum, I think that's his name.
Oh, Corum.
Corum, there you go.
Oh yeah, he is in Sailors on Seas of Fate. Yeah, I read the first Corum trilogy, which is better, I think, than Elric. He's not a doomed hero though, so that has something to do with it. But there's also a character in The Fortress of Pearl. It's the guy that has the cat, right? Am I misremembering? There's a guy with the cats in The Fortress of Pearl for like at least a second.
Not familiar, but
and he keeps on telling like Elric that he knows him, but Elric's like, I have no clue who you are.
I
Alnick.
remember that.
Alnick.
Out of time.
What was that?
I think it was Alnick.
Opera?
Right?
Maybe. I don't even remember his name right now, which is bad. But I'm pretty sure he's in there, and he is like he's a character in Corum as well. Right in the Fortress of Pearl, he does it more even in Sailors Seas of Fate, but he's bringing in his like his multiverse thing. You know, he mentions London, I think, in the Fortress of the Pearl. And yeah, with all those, I think Corum Erakoze, I think, is in the Sailor and Seas of Fate. Is Hawkmoon in there? I'm not really sure. They're all Elric.
Hawkmoon is definitely in there. I remember that.
They're all aspects of the Eternal Champion, which, you know, is again tied to this fate idea and law versus chaos.
Yeah. I don't feel like I don't feel like it's fair to read these in the same way that you would read a typical modern day fantasy novel. I don't feel like it plays out the same way or it's intended to. It's just a different aesthetic in a way.
It's like reading Beowulf in, you know, with a mindset that it's going to be something like Malazan or Brandon.
Exactly. Good example. Yeah.
I mean, we're only talking about sword and sorcery in the 80s. Again, I don't know why it gets a pass. I don't understand.
But what do you mean by pass?
It feels like there are excuses being made for Moorcock because he has great ideas, but it is a jumble of a series.
I think you can, this is not just for Moorcock, but I think in general, you can recognize the flaws and elements of a story that are from a modern lens are problematic, I guess, like in regards to like the misogynistic, like lack of female agency aspects of it. You can read something, whether it was from the 80s or the 1880s or whatever, you can recognize that, hey, this is a problem in today's modern lens, but for the time it was either commonplace or this is why it was presented that way. And so that's how I'm reading Elric. And again, even though it was just the 70s and 80s, that's still, oh God, that's 40 and 50 years ago. It is a reflection of its time, but it's not like, I don't know. It's not that I give him a pass. It's that I don't think that his intention was to create these very complex and nuanced characters as we see today's characters being nuanced or complex. It's different. It was a different time. It was written in a different time. So
yeah.
Like,
I mean, that's what you do, though. When you read other kinds of genres, you're not going to evaluate a romance novel the same way you do a fantasy novel necessarily. You're not going to evaluate Jane Austen the same way you would Elric. You know, it's like you. I don't know. I guess I feel like there's room to appreciate different kinds of story or different kinds of approach to narrative.
And on the flip side, like Dragonlance Chronicles was written in the 80s. I loved it when I was a kid, but rereading it as an adult, I'm like, this didn't age well for me.
Yeah, I
But
felt bad
that
that I
was just
didn't.
for me. So
Yeah,
like
same
other
here.
people could love that.
I mean, I didn't love him either. So
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what would we classify it as? Like, if somebody, I'm not meaning to be very aggressive. I'm sorry, I'm in pain, so I may be coming across more strongly than I mean to. What would we classify? So if somebody were watching this and they were going to pick up Elric for the first time, what would you tell them to expect? Would you tell them to expect sword and sorcery, philosophy, a multiverse story, novelettes that have been stitched together? Like, how would you
That was a
present
really
this
good
to somebody?
description. That's a good list there.
That's something very
All
complex
of the
to
above.
accept, though, for a new reader in today's society. So that's generally my question here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I would just present it as episodic, like not quite monster of the week, but that type of style of storytelling.
I can get behind
where-
Scooby-Doo. I can get behind Scooby-Doo.
I mean, those meddling kids. So
Sorry.
so yeah, like I would kind of, my selling point would be just, you want to have an adventure, you want to truly escape and not have to, I don't want to say not have to think, but like, again, I read this as episodic adventures that I'm not expecting any kind of profound consistency in the storytelling other than his writing. Like the way that Moorcock writes, I can't wait to write more Elric, and anything that's not Elric, assuming that his writing is consistent in those other series, because I just like the way he writes. It's it's compulsively readable without being too flowery, but not so like straightforward or plain or bland or whatever, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think
I did give Elric of Melniboné 5 stars. So I mean, I loved that first story. It was so good. Like, to the point I was getting ready to rant and rave about it, and then, like, the Fortress of the Pearl is, again, it's that kind of psychedelic kind of dream state with like multiple worlds, and I really loved that. And then there was the 3 different time zones, which I was confused at first. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? I enjoyed that, and then I got to weird, and
is it like harder to? So, if I understand right, you're a big problem with weird, besides the whole Silmaril and Erkard thing, is also the women's thing, or his interest in women and his relationships in that book. Is that too far fetched to think? I don't know. Are we talking like, is his amorous relations like too far removed from the fact that he commits genocide at the end of the second book? I mean, like, Elric's not a good guy.
Yeah, but they kind of had it coming.
Yeah, he had it coming, but it's still genocide. He kills everyone in the city. Like, that's pretty messed up, Like,
Yeah.
I just feel like it's different. I don't feel like this is the same type of fantasy where you have the same kind of, I mean, I think Fortress of the Pearl, actually, that does have a more clear, linear sort of arc to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that this is the word I keep coming up with, and this is largely thanks to AP, because he brought this word up in a discussion, and I thought, oh, that's the word. It's mythic, because that's actually been in the back of my mind since I started reading it. So a lot of fantasy these days, it really seems to go, like, a modern fantasy story goes towards more of the trying to be realistic. Even though we have fantasy elements, it still tries to ground it in our world. Like, there's a grounding aspect to it. Whereas I feel like this is a little more free flow, and he sort of flows with it more. And so it's like, when I'm reading this, it's more like dream-like fantasy in a way.
And I think
I'm okay
was
with it.
willing to, like, knowing he was willing to draw on horror and sci-fi, and you can see his other influences, and those, especially sci-fi, is less focused on that narrative arc and more in tune with what the ideas and the point that they want to get across is. And I think that Moorcock just embraces that. He doesn't feel like he needs to fit that linear idea. It's like Liam said, like this was first of all published in a magazine. So it's not like it was the same thing as like the first Dark Tower book, The Gunslinger. Like it was published as a series of short stories and then bound into a novel and then became part of a larger series. But it's a different thing than a book that someone sat down and said, this is going to be the beginning of my story, and this is going to be the arc of my story, and this is going to be how my story resolves. And you just see that in Elric, and people have to know. So I think, Andrew, for your question, like people just need to know what they're getting into. Because if you go into it expecting a fantasy novel in the sense that we read now, that's probably not what you're going to get. But if you are interested in seeing like what Moorcock did differently than so many people, and especially like so many of the popular people, like I think this is the thing with Tolkien, is that he was writing the like, not purely, but like the pastoral inspired novel where you have a quest and a home to return to and something that you're fighting for. And Elric is just not about that. But we couldn't get to where we are now in fantasy without things like Elric, which is, I think, a good reason to read it. That's why I wanted to read it.
That's
less for the story, less for the arcs, less for the, like, there are definitely times when I was reading this that I was really glad it was an audiobook. So I was like, this is a bit tedious. Like, this is not, I'm not super invested, but as a whole, I think it's interesting to see where the trends are, like where we are now, like where did that come from?
Yeah. And I think part of my struggle with the bind up was it, you know, like Joanna was saying, Fortress of the Pearl has a complete arc. It feels cohesive. The same thing I would say with Elric of Melniboné. It has a very, what I would consider modern fantasy kind of progression. And then we kind of get to, all of a sudden we're at the Seas of Fate and we're in the White Wolf, and that's not what those are. So the way that we approach this bind up is you get, the first half of the book is one thing, and then the second half of the book is something completely separate, and it catches you, the reader, off guard. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where a lot of my animosity, we're gonna go with animosity. My animosity, I'm coming through super aggressive, and I'm so sorry.
Listen, Andrew, don't apologize.
Yeah.
Like embrace it.
Embrace the anger.
We've all hated things. Maybe not Joanna. Have you ever hated anything, Joanna? I feel like never. Not a person, not a thing.
Well, I have a very unpopular opinion of J City, but we won't go there. But I'm going to reread it.
You can box me your opinions on that, because that is one I haven't started yet, and I'm still on the fence. But
but no, I think your point is completely valid, Andrew. I think that you're from what I'm gathering, it's like you had a certain expectation based on the first two stories, and then suddenly the narrative approach took a totally different direction, and that caught you off guard.
Yeah, and that could be one of the downfalls for you of reading chronologically, because if you were reading publication date wise and you were reading like short stories interspersed, because I don't even know the answer to this, Liam, you probably do, like the further along the timeline we get, do they become more complete novels as you go on? Like, are more of the short story type things early and then like the longer books later, or?
William's face says no.
I mean, maybe Stormbringer a little bit. And Revenge of the Rose is like Fortress of the Pearl. It came out a few years after Fortress of the Pearl. Mm-hmm. But besides that, even this newest one is like actually kind of a mix between the old ones and the more recent ones. The last part of this one is kind of like Fortress of the Pearl, but the first two were not. They're just, I don't know. They're different than what you get. And I like it personally. I mean, like, I like anything, and I also have harsh opinions about some things. Like me calling out Robin Hobb that one time, which no one liked. But no, I'm going
to remove you now.
But it's important, and it's like
I've already got Evie and Derry.
Paramita says actually, he's really Moorcock is really influential, and in fact, even going back to that question earlier, I mean, like, we probably wouldn't get Nightblood and Sanderson stuff without Moorcock. We probably wouldn't get The Witcher at all. We wouldn't get Malazan. I mean, Malazan, Erickson, and Esselmount read Sword and Sorcery stuff, and Elric. You can't ignore Elric when you're reading Sword and Sorcery. And you get Kring, I think, is that the sword from the Discworld? You get Black Razor from Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, we just get so much. Any albino, basically.
Albino, albinism did not exist.
Well, actually, Moorcock got the albino idea from what's his name, Zenith the albino, who's a pulp magazine guy. So, but you know, most fantasy guys are going to be getting it from Moorcock. But so, yeah, I don't know. It's just important, but also the inconsistency is an interesting thing, because if you read something like the Book of the New Sun, the main character is super inconsistent, and that's the point. Actually, and that's part of the reason why I love the book. You know, because the main character is sometimes he's Elric. You know, essentially he's pretty nice, he's understanding, he tries to do the right thing, and other times he's a terrible person, right? So like you'll go from one page loving him, and the next page you absolutely hate him and you just want him to die, and it's just like, and that's cool in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like what's not to like about that? You know, like. I mean, I guess that's maybe a little inconsistent, but then something like Book of the New Sun and even Elric are not, I guess, what you would expect when you're going into, say, I would say most of our modern fantasy trends come from like the 90s or late 80s with like Memories of Heart and Thorn and then Wheel of Time, where you're getting these consistent like arcs, you know, in big fantasy series, big beefy books, you know what I mean? And yeah, so that's definitely not that.
Yeah,
and it's like you said earlier, Joanna, you were saying that modern fantasy wants to be grounded in realism in some way. And I think a lot of that comes from the character development. Like people are expecting the characters to act like people, even if they have magic, even if they're in another world, like they want them to act in logical or emotional ways, but ways that fit true to how we act. And that inconsistency is not really accepted as much anymore, because then we'll say, well, people don't act like that, so those characters are not authentic and those are not genuine characters, and that's a complaint that people will have. Whereas with books like Elric, and I'm assuming Book of the New Sun, if it's like that too, Liam, then people are more forgiving of that. Like you're looking, there's different things that you're looking for. It's just a different way to make your character.
Yeah, there's this sense of, probably not the right word, but melodrama with, at least if Elric is any indication of sword and sorcery. But and I do.
So what we need to do is read more sword and sorcery so that Liam's not the only person who knows.
Yeah.
to that point, though, that is usually a huge critique issue for me, is if I feel the characters are doing something that is completely unrealistic. A lot of the times, if I'm complaining about something, that's what I'm complaining about. Mm-hmm. So I guess that kind of reframes my complaint in a new light. It's something that I really struggle to wrap my brain around. I keep coming back to the fact that he was impaled or like half cut in half and still reaches back and grabs somebody. And like my brain goes, that's not how biology works. And then it becomes a mark in the negative towards the book side.
So I think of it as like a D&D campaign. Like they rolled it was a bad roll. He couldn't save it. He had to charge on by. He didn't get his.
Just rolled a nat one.
He did.
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah, no, I'm the same way though. I feel like I can be really critical of books if the characters seem unrealistic to me. And this is the big if it's more of a character-driven story. So if it's something like Robin Hobb, I am going to go into that with a certain expectation versus something like this, I think.
And you're judging it against the author, right? Like, did the author set out to write a realistic character and then failed in that execution? Or was this something that they weren't even aiming for in the first place? Like, you have to hold it against its own standard, I guess. Like, you can't look for something in a book that the author never agreed to give you. If that makes sense.
Again, that also kind of feeds back into the first two stories feel like a very modern like style. There is that consistency. There are, as a reader, if you are picking up this bind up, like you just bought the bind up, you're just reading Elric for the first time, you know no history about it, and you go in with an expectation, the first and second book in this bind up would give you that expectation, and then you get the third and the fourth. Well, I'll give the third a pass. You get the fourth.
And I have to be really transparent here because I did double up with audio for the second and for the last half of the book, whereas I just visually read the first half. And I have to admit, I do think the audio enhanced my experience for the last.
I liked it on audio as well, Joanna. I thought that it was a nice way to.
That's because Samuel Rukin is a legend.
Can we, as a collective, just be sad that we bought these, like, or we didn't, Evie, lovely, generous, darling queen of a woman, bought these bind-ups, and we get 3 pages of illustrations. I was like, this is the most hilarious illustrated volume that I've ever seen. Like, the end pages are gorgeous. The pictures are great, but there's like 6 of them in the middle.
By the way, Joanna, did you realize it's Brom?
Yes, I did. I did know that. Yeah.
I didn't know that until I was like, wait, that says Brom. Holy crap.
Brom.
So
he did an amazing job too. Yeah, I think the second one is not Brom, from what I understand.
It's Waylon.
Oh, it's Waylon. Yeah, and Waylon's amazing too. Waylon is top tier fantasy artist there.
Y'all are just making my heart happy right now. I'll always listen to some Waylon praise.
Even if they were in the spot where they took place, like, why are they just in the middle? Like, I'm assuming it's because it's easier to bind that way, but like, even if they were just in the right story, it would be preferable.
Definitely.
It's my mini bind up rant, but
I don't have that. So
I think we can all agree that the even though it's chronological, the choice of binding up these 4 is a little bit it's not gonna work for everyone. Go for audio if you like it. I really liked the audio for the last 2, so I might do audio from now on. So
they are on script.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yes,
yeah.
I think that's where I got the first one. So it's like
Second and third are also on script.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. But they're really fun to talk about, even if I don't. So none of these books will ever, I don't think, be my favorites. Like, I like them, but it's more like academic interest. I just like seeing where they came from and what came after. But talking about them is really fun. This makes me like them way more.
Yeah.
Or hearing Andrew rant about them.
Well, honestly, me ranting makes me hate them a little less.
That's nice. You exercise the demons.
Well, it's always good to come into a discussion with people with dissenting opinions, because then I can kind of come to a little bit more of a medium ground and be Joanna, I don't remember the discussion or what it was about. You've changed my mind before about something.
I think it was Poppy War.
It was Poppy War. Now, am I still a fan of Poppy War? No.
I don't think
but I'm not as vehement as I was.
Yeah.
So I enjoy these kind of discussions, even
and
though
I'm not even the biggest fan of Poppy War. I liked it, but I wasn't like a super diehard fan either. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I think discussions are good and helpful. It reminds me of like something like if I'm rereading for the 5th time the Iliad, and I like the Iliad. I don't know if I want to read it 5 times. But,
only the 5th time.
no, but at the beginning of the very first book of the Iliad, right, Achilles comes up as a huge baby, just like Agamemnon. And but I had a teacher tell me about, the Greek. It's kind of like a reciprocity system, but their code of honor, essentially, right? And in that case, Achilles doesn't sound like a baby. Achilles is fully justified in how he acts, right? And so, like, in that case, it's kind of like what we were going back earlier. A little different because this is an ancient text, right? But like, as a modern reader, I did not understand that at all because I'm not from ancient Greek Aegean society, right? You know what I mean? But now understanding that, I appreciate it a lot more, right? And then I think it's the same also with a little bit like Moorcock. This is very melancholy, but his influences are the Broken Sword, which is melancholy, and the Kalevala, and that's melancholy. And that's fine, but not all sword and sorcery melancholy. A lot of recent sword and sorcery is, in my opinion, and that's probably because people are sad with life. But turbulent times, that's what someone called sword and sorcery. They're writing for turbulent times. But if you read something like, maybe it's a little too off topic, but if you read something like Howard, and Raph pointed this out actually, Raph Blutax in his 1000K live stream recently. The reason he was a big fan of Robert E. Howard is because you can tell he calls it writing for his life, right? So like, it's not so melancholy, but you can just get so much emotion from someone like Robert E. Howard. Nice. Why? Because the guy he's literally writing for his life, right? And he died when he was 30 by suicide, right? And it's very sad, right? And so it's just like, and you can feel that in his writing. You're like, this guy is like it gives off sparks. I think there's someone that, like, there's a quote on one of the books that says that, right? But then someone like Liber, he generally doesn't give that feeling, right? You know, maybe in his non-sword and sorcery stuff, like Our Lady of Darkness, where he's dealing with alcoholism and his wife recently passed, you know, and so it's just like, and he's very upset. Or like even like a good sword and sorcery one where it is, you know, kind of like Elric and a little bit like Robert E. Howard is Sometime Lofty Towers by David C. Smith, just came out a couple of years ago. I mean, that's a great book, right? And you can tell that the author is pissed because his dad died when he shouldn't have died, right? And so like he's mad at like capitalism in that sense, kind of, right? It's also like an anti-colonial thing, you know, you're getting from this sword and sorcery book. But someone like Liber is just like, he's very he was an actor, he's a professional actor, you know, and so like you get that like this wit, this verve kind of from Liber that you don't get in other sword and sorcery writers, because it's like he's acting out on stage, like it's some Shakespeare stuff, right? And so it's just like, and it's really funny. Fall from the Grey Mouser is by Fritz Leiber, and that's kind of why I like it, because it's a little more happy compared to a lot of other sword and sorcery, but it's still really badass. I mean, like in a sense, I mean, to be completely honest, I mean, we reread a lot for entertainment, you know, and sword and sorcery is really good at being badass in very short amount of time. While in epic fantasy, you get a lot of badass stuff, but you're going to have to read 1,000 pages sometimes before you get to it. Or maybe you get in the prologue and then you'll get it at the end of the book. And then, but in like Fall from the Grey Mouser, like something like Ilmed and Linkmar, it won a Hugo and a Nebula, and that book is so good from beginning to end. It's so good. It's so full of emotion and like charge. Like when I read that, I had to stand up. Like I could not sit down. I was like, this is so good. Like how the heck did someone write this? Like, and like, you know, you'll also feel like crying at the same time because it's so sad. I won't spoil the story why it's sad, but at the same time, it's about friendship, it's about love, and you know, it's about dealing with that at the same time. So I mean, like, you get a lot of good stuff from literature, and heck, I think to tell people what Elric is, I think Elric is, yeah, it's kind of like Parmita said, they're connected stories, but they're also standalone stories, right? You get them from a magazine. But Moorcock himself sees himself as a literary writer. I mean, if I read the essay again, Aspects of Fantasy, recently. The video is way too long, so you know. But Moorcock, he says like there's something to be said, you know, about literary fiction, you know, and I would go so far as to say there's no difference between literary and genre fiction, but you know, like this is important stuff, you know, besides the fact that it's entertaining. You know what I mean? The Iliad doesn't just teach you, oh yeah, there's this cool war, you know, and they killed each other. It's sad. The Iliad is sad, because everyone's dead, you know, and they're doomed, and they're all on the field dead next to each other, you know. And why? Because of some petty reason. And so it's just like that. I think that's what Elric is good for as well. It's just like Elric is doomed. You know what I mean? So like, what does that mean? Well, let's figure it out. And it does it in a way that, you know, you're not going to get most of your modern fantasy. But I think it's successful in doing it.
Yeah, I think no, I mean absolutely. I totally agree, and I think, you know, whether you're reading the Iliad or, you know, the next great American novel, fantasy, whatever, we all bring, you know, the writer writes in a time and a place, not only culturally and societally, but like individually. So they're going to bring their individual kind of gripes or joys or whatever to the text as they're writing. Because I could write a letter with an intention to do something, but the way that I feel on a given day could kind of color the content. So that like that's how I envision how writers are. I'm not a writer, so I wouldn't know. But you know, writers write in a time and a place and put themselves at that time into a text, and that kind of colors the story. And then also as a reader, given the time and the place in which we are reading the text, like we're going to be taking our moods, our cultural like goings on, and putting it onto the page and reflecting on it in that way. So, because like, you know, I could read something 10 years ago, love it. Well, as Dragonlance is an example, I loved Dragonlance when I was a kid. I didn't like it so much as an adult, but even something that I absolutely loved 10 years ago when I originally read it, I can read it now and have a new, like, it could have a different aspect. It can shift a little bit. So
Yeah, beautifully said.
Anyways,
So do I pay my college tuition now or
what now?
at the end of the live show for the lesson? I can write a check. I can do a money order. What are we doing here?
I don't know. Wait, what? I'm confused.
It's a joke.
Oh, I didn't hear half of that because I was just like, ugh.
It's really interesting for me personally because I read 3 of these. Let's see, I have the original Elric Saga. This is what I read when I was a teenager, and this was actually one of the first fantasy books I've ever read. I borrowed, this isn't one I just got from a used bookstore, but I borrowed it from a friend who was older than I was. And actually the story is that I started it and I DNF'd it because I don't know, I couldn't get into it at first. It was just different for me. Mm-hmm. And then I tried it again. I remember my friend shaming me about it. He said, why couldn't you get into it? I was always getting shamed every time I DNF a book at that time, which is probably why I'm like scared of DNFing now. But at the time I was shamed for it. So I went back to it and I tried again. And then I really loved it. I loved it. I remember finishing the book and just wanting more and kind of being sad it was over. And I didn't know anything though. I mean, I hadn't read any real modern fantasy aside from Tolkien and maybe a little bit of Eddings, Piers Anthony, just stuff like that. So I don't know. I didn't really have any sort of frame in mind of what fantasy should be.
You didn't have the expectations.
I didn't. No. So. I was just entertained. I thought it was cool. No, I didn't remember anything about it though, all these years later, because that was a long time ago. But yeah, it's just interesting to return to it and then hear this discussion.
Yeah. So I think moral of this live stream is Andrew doesn't know how to have fun when reading.
Okay.
So
fair. Fair.
I'm just teasing you.
Nope, it's out there. It's out there now. I do not understand fun. I'm going to change my channel name to Andrew's Wizardly Does Not Understand Fun. Now that I've hit 3,000 subscribers, I'm changing the channel name.
Do it. Anyways, we're over an hour. So any final thoughts on Elric, or did we, in Andrew's case, exercise all the demons? So
I have exercised the demons.
There you go. All right. Glad you got that reference.
It's a good way to end.
All right. We might have another live stream about Stormbreaker. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But we'll definitely let you guys know if that happens. So thank you for joining. Pair meetup, basically. So it was great hearing your thoughts, and thank you everyone for joining me. So.
Goodbye.
Thank you.